Israel is presenting us with a video about the first tunnel entrance they found in the area of the Al-Shifa hospital. We are going to watch that and put it into some perspective to also the weapons they find on the property of the Al-Shifa hospital. And the Houthis took over a ship, a freighter in the Red Sea. We'll talk about this as well. And we have a video about this as well in this situation report about Israel's war against Hamas. Hello and welcome. The fight in Gaza Strip is continuing. Israel has now cut off the center for a couple of days. They have secured the area where the Al-Shifa hospital is, which is the biggest hospital inside the Gaza Strip. Israel is telling the world for 10-15 years that Hamas has a command center there, a whole tunnel complex under it. So obviously the big question is, what do they have there? Initially, they published a number of pictures and videos of weapons they find like this here. The problem there is that they are clearly presented to the audience. They also published a video of one of their press officers going through the hospital, presenting go bags and weapons and stuff that they found there. Again, we could, if we want to claim that the Israelis planted it before. Just to make it clear, I do not believe the Israelis are lying here. I believe the Israeli side, but believing doesn't mean knowing. And obviously, there will always be some room for some people to dispute it. Generally, also, finding a weapon or two inside of a hospital might be uncommon. But in theory, one can argue that those are guardsmen. A hospital can have guards as well, and they might be armed, even though Kalashnikov might be somewhat uncommon weaponry. And at least on one of the videos, we saw a hand grenade in the radiology area as well, and that's probably not some guard equipment too. Again, I just want to emphasize, I believe the Israeli side, but believing doesn't mean knowing. So while we can talk about this and argue whether those weapons were placed there, and then we have all the images there, whenever we see those, somebody has been there before. So somebody could have taken the weapons from the house across the street and placed them in this area. This is a constant theme, whether you want to believe the Israelis or not. And if you don't want to, then you will always have a chance to dispute. We have a different thing though, and that is what they present here. Tunnels. Tunnels are a black and white thing, unless some very unstable persons might believe and claim that the Israelis quickly dig tunnels under the hospital and build them. We either find them or we don't. There is no disputing whether there's a tunnel or not if you can walk into it. Now, the Israelis have presented the first tunnel. This is the wall of the Al-Shifa hospital, and this is the hospital. And we can see that the tunnel shaft is on the premises. Now, they are approaching it. From my understanding, it must be some kind of drone. I quickly accelerated because the drone isn't the fastest. Now here, theoretically, this is a rounded staircase. Here, theoretically, we could try to guess in which direction the tunnel points. The problem there is I'm not sure that I am capable of properly doing that. And unless I don't want to have the embarrassment claiming that it points towards the hospital when it actually points somewhere else. So I'll leave that to someone else to take the time and measure and claim and to prove that it points wherever he wants to. So we see them going down. At the end, there is a connection straight out, and then to the left here, that could be some weaponry, some missile, some rocket start items, whatever, but the Israelis didn't claim anything about it. And then we see the tunnel going forward and ending at a blast door, as the Israelis call it. Now, the Israelis have said they haven't opened that door yet because they don't know what's behind it. And what we can see here with the firing hole already explains why they haven't done it. This is a straight line, or a more or less straight line. If this door is properly reinforced to be strong enough against rifle fire, all that's needed is a Hamas terrorist on the other side opening that slit, putting through the muzzle of a machine gun, and he can mow down every Israeli soldier in that hallway. So the Israelis will take their time, and they will take a lot of time to advance there. But either the tunnels are there or they aren't. We shouldn't expect them to rush down with 20 people to find out that the store here is rigged with explosives and losing the 20 men in the process. So it will probably take days until we see further where this even leads to. Does it lead under the hospital? Does it lead to the site? Is that a storage area behind it, or does it give access to a whole network? We will simply find out at this. In the end, we will learn whether the Israelis' claims about the tunnel network under Al-Shifa was true or not, simply by the Israelis having the opportunity to show us. But at that point, we also need to say, if it turns out that there are no tunnels, that Hamas didn't have tunnels under Al-Shifa, while that would be an embarrassment for Israel, while it would probably hurt their credibility, it wouldn't be a problem law-wise. It would be a problem if Israel had claimed that Hamas is using Al-Shifa for military purpose and then bombed it, which, depending on the circumstances, might allow the Israelis a legal claim to bomb a hospital, because the Hamas is not allowed to use a hospital for military purpose, and there is no request whatsoever, no necessity by the Israelis to allow Hamas shooting at them just because they are in a hospital. Of course, they could strike back. So had they bombed Al-Shifa and they don't find tunnels, it would be a disaster for them, but they haven't bombed it. So we'll see whether they find the tunnels or not. I'm curious to see them. I'm curious to see, because I follow this conflict for decades, and it's an old theme that whenever a conflict happens, that it's being said that the leadership of Hamas is hiding under Al-Shifa in a bunker under it. Whether it's just the basement, a lower basement, or whether it's an actual tunnel system like the Israelis recently showed in their animations, we'll obviously have to see. But as said, we need to put it into some perspective. Israel also said that they found a dead hostage close to the hospital. The hospital was the hostage was Corporal Noah Marciano, and she was found dead. Hamas is saying she was killed through an Israeli airstrike. Israel is saying that the airstrike killed the hostage taker and wounded Marciano. She was brought into Al-Shifa alive and was killed inside of Al-Shifa by Hamas at a later point. Obviously, again, word against word, unless we see video evidence by the surveillance cameras, by the CCTV cameras inside of Al-Shifa, we will not know what actually happened, and we will be forced to believe either side, because there are CCTV cameras and the Israelis have now published recordings of hostages being brought into Al-Shifa on October the 7th. Now, I don't show them to you because there's some blood visible and YouTube doesn't like blood too much. You will have no problem finding it. Just look on the official IDF site on Twitter and you'll find it themselves. You'll find it there because they published it themselves. We just need to put it into perspective again, because Hamas is claiming they were wounded and they were brought into the hospital. And while I already said there is some blood visible, at others there isn't, but it's well known that you can even be heavily injured without visible blood. Theoretically, Hamas could have been right here. If they have a wounded hostage, obviously hostage taking by terrorists is a crime. We don't need to talk about this. But bringing a wounded hostage into a hospital to have it treated there is not a war crime and is not a military use of the hospital, even if you guard that hostage while you do that. It would be different if they are healthy, if they are well fed, if they are fine, and then still being kept inside of the hospital. Then we would obviously talk about a completely different scenario. But as so far, we have not seen video evidence about this yet. Again, I think I emphasize it now for the third or fourth time. I do believe Israel, but believing doesn't mean that anything is perfectly true, and it doesn't mean that I'm not allowed to question anything further, that I have to take anything they say by word, even though my sympathies are clearly on the Israeli side. The next news from Israel is that the claim is that the Israeli air defense system using laser has been used for the first time in anger in an active event shooting down a projectile, a missile, or a mortar grenade coming from the Gaza Strip, and it succeeded in using that. That should be a world's first event of a use of a laser air defense system ever being used. This is the second time already in this war, because when an Israeli Arrow battery shot down a Houthi missile being fired from Yemen, it shot it down in space, and thus that was a first time ever as well in this regard. And when mentioning the Houthis, we have a video here. This shows the Houthis taking over the freighter Galaxy Leader. Galaxy Leader is a car transport ship. They usually carry several thousand cars from the producers to the consumer markets. And we see here a Mil-Me 17, that is a transport helicopter made by the Soviet Union and Russia that is flying in, and obviously we can see the Yemenite flag, red, white, black, and the Palestinian flag painted at the bottom. They are landing here and jumping off. Now, they are claiming this is a legitimate target because it's an Israeli ship, and as it's so often in international shipping, it's complicated. So the ship is owned over a few corners by an Israeli company. The ship is owned by a British company that is in turn owned by an Israeli company. That doesn't mean it's flagged, I think, in Liberia, and the crew is from the Philippines and other countries. This is how international shipping works. Panama has the biggest, or one of the biggest trade fleets in the world, but not because it owns those ships, but because Panama is used as a flag of convenience in this regard. And it's the same with crew, with charter and so on. I think the ship was chartered by a Japanese company. So as it goes with ships, a lot of nations involved. They took 25 hostages here, but neither of them is an Israeli citizen. So the hope would be that they would be released pretty soon. As we can see, the freighter was empty. The Houthis boarded it afterwards and then brought it into a harbor in their controlled area that we can see here. Let me quickly advance here. We see them driving around and then escorting the freighter towards a harbor in Yemen. Finally, some good news at the end. It said that in the negotiations in Qatar are coming to a point where some success might be possible soon. The talk is about a ceasefire for 5 days. In return, Hamas would release 50 women and children that are held hostage. Each day, probably then 10. Or a certain number around that in return. In return, the fighting would stop for 5 days. Now, I don't really know why Hamas would do that. I don't see a point in that. What does Hamas gain from that? Do they think that extending the fighting increases the diplomatic pressure? That could probably be a point. Or do they think that the leadership might use those ceasefire to get away? That's up to you, probably. A good idea for you to write in the comment section what do you think about the purpose of that for Hamas. For Israel, it's obvious they want to get the hostages and everyone you free at that point without releasing thousands of prisoners from your own cells is an absolute win for Israel in this regard. Regardless, that was it already from me for now. I try to be as unbiased as possible as here. I try to be as objective as possible. I am clearly on one side in this conflict, no doubt about this, but I don't feel like this should lead to me believing everything by word and just taking a picture that is clearly staged. And it's staged for a purpose, for the press to see it, to demonstrate to the press how many weapons were there. While it's staged, I don't think I should take it as a fact until I'm convinced in another case. Like if Hamas would present me with this, I wouldn't believe them. So I probably should try to be somewhat skeptical as well. I'm not sure. This topic is obviously a minefield, and some of the audience will always be angered one way or the other, but I guess I can't help it. If you liked it regardless, then I would really appreciate the thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. And and if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting this channel. And that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.